Namaskar, everyone. So to make Vandanaji's job easier, I have 6 points to talk about. So you can track me 2 minutes each. Okay. So my paper for this conference was Ayurveda as the foundation of modern medicine. And you know what, if this conference was not on Ayurveda, then possibly I would have written something like, just with a slight modification, still it's amazing how the foundations remains the same. So instead of Ayurveda as the foundation of modern medicine, I might have written a paper on, say, Darshana Shastra as the foundation of modern science. And that would have worked just fine, for example. Now, I have used certain frameworks, and I'm using the word frameworks because that's how it came afterwards. When I actually did the research, I did not think in terms of I'm using a framework. I was just doing the research. And so this is last 35 years. But once that work came out through my books, through my blogs, and through my multiple talks, people started asking me, or usually actually coming after the talk and says, Nilesh, I want to do a work just like you. And I said, so go do it, all the best. And they said, no, but how did you do it? And so in a way of kind of communicating that, then I started thinking, okay, let me think, how did I do it? And thinking kind of backwards, thought of few things to do. And I thought maybe I'll just give one framework, and then that I found after some time that doesn't work for them. There is something more that I did not tell them, not deliberately, but that's where they are getting stuck. So as far as the paper is concerned, what I did is, as a framework I use for this, my paper, so prevention, cure, and patient management. And if you want to know more about it, so for example, prevention is like how the vaccination journey began in India as variolation and then came into UK, how it got improvised through Edward Jenner and some of the things. So you can watch my talks, or one of my co-researchers, Mitra Desai, she wrote a very small book, novelette called Shitara, and it's available on Amazon if you want to read through that as a prevention, as a vaccination. Cure is the famous story of a rhinoplasty. Like 1794, two British medical men saw a plastic surgery being performed on the streets of Pune, and from there, how the whole journey took place. That is through some of my talks, like on the Sushruta, so you can watch those. And the last one, as a patient management, where we don't know actually what the solution is, but we have to still do the things that make patient comfortable. And for that, I picked a case study, you can say, from a 14,000-year-old text, Valmiki Ramayana, and there specifically the Kumbhakarna, the guy who sleeps for 6 months, and Kumbhakarna and a Klein-Levin syndrome. So you can read my articles on this or some of the talks. Point number 2. Now, in doing this, people ask me, how come you go through these different areas? And I just mentioned from Ayurveda because that's the conference today. But I have used the same frameworks in dating the Mahabharata, dating Ramayana, dating Rigveda, studying Saraswati. And they say, how can you go into, or even genetic bottlenecks, like a Y chromosomes bottleneck, and connecting that with the timing of Mahabharata and so on. And people say, how do you figure this out? And actually, I don't know the answer other than the fact that these frameworks help me. So I'm going to talk about the 4 frameworks. And for example, like what Candace mentioned in her talk, she said that what may be considered as like a normal in the modern medicine, like your blood pressure is normal, from an Ayurveda perspective, it can be extraordinary. Okay, that the very fact it is balanced so well. So these frameworks actually will feel like a very casual and very simple things. And you said, what's big deal about it? And I'll leave it to you to decide whether it's a big deal or whether they are very simple and very obvious. Actually, I think they are very obvious. They are very common sense. But let me just go with the 4 of them. The first one, which when people ask me, I say, well, what you have to do in the modern science, we'll call it the logic of scientific discovery or logic of scientific method. Sir Karl Popper, if you have heard the name, it refers to, you have a problem. To solve the problem, you propose a hypothesis. Once you propose a hypothesis, you know what kind of evidence to collect. And if the evidence doesn't exist, then you know what kind of experiments to perform. So it is the theory that tells you what can be observed. So other than what is said in the hypothesis, you are not allowed to observe things, or you are not allowed to collect things, at least as far as that cycle is complete. And then you collect the data, you find an objective way to test it, and you draw the inferences. And in the process, you take certain things for granted, you assume certain things, and you better state them. So Karl Popper would say something like this. He would say it's a triangulation of explanation, prediction, testing in the context of a theory, in the context of background knowledge. Now, this is 1960. Thousands of years before Karl Popper, if you ask sage Gautama in the Nyaya Darshana, he would just say, very short in Sanskrit, he would say, Pancha Avayava. And then naturally the next question is, what are those 5 elements? And then, of course, he will say, Pratidnya, Hetu, Udaharana, Upanaya, Nigamanani, Avayava, and so on. So that's one framework. And I said, that's good enough. But then people started asking me, okay, but how did you go from astronomy to oceanography, to climatology, to sedimentology, to genetics, physical anthropology? And I said, you know what? When you make something revolutionary work, then you get the clapping just for that. But the journey is not over. In a simple language, we say, no good work goes unpunished. So when I did the dating of Mahabharata, people said, well, Nilesh, why don't you do the Ramayana? And when I did the Ramayana, they said, how about Rigveda? When I did the Rigveda, I said, how about the river Saraswati? And what about Parshuram? And just goes on and on. So for example, the second framework, again in the modern science, we call it tetradic schema, which is P1, TT, EE, P2. So first problem, let's say Mahabharata. When did Mahabharata war happen? That's a problem one. To solve it, my tentative hypothesis was astronomy descriptions of Mahabharata text are descriptions of Mahabharata times. So I started reading Mahabharata. Because Mahabharata text, I found 300 astronomy descriptions. Imagine solving them like a jigsaw puzzle, crossword puzzle, taking that as a clues. If you do that, if anyone does that, it's not about Nilesh, it's about Mahabharata, you will come to one answer, 5561 BCE. I did the same thing for Ramayana and so on. Now, once that is done, the people say, okay, so 7,500 years ago, interesting. So how did people know how to make astronomy measurements that time? Because our modern chronology will tell you that no such sophisticated thing existed 7,500 years ago. So that error elimination is done, but the next, so P1, TTE, P2, now the new problem is, how did they measure it? Or whatever else it could be. Or is there any other evidence other than astronomy which also points to that 7,500 years? So that is what I'm calling P1, TTE, P2. Now I thought I was done. So people say, well, I understood that, but still I have a problem. How did you decide which observation or which problem to tackle first, sub-problem to tackle first? And sort of a generic thing I will say, this is known in the modern science as the process of successive approximation. So you kind of start outwards, find the limits, and get to your target. Okay, so how do you do that? Well, I don't think there is a very unique way of doing it. But every time you test something, you ask the question, what is it giving me? Is it giving me a point answer, or is it giving me a range? Like certain range as my answer, certain interval as my answer. If it's an interval, that is where possibly you want to start. So you got one interval, take another observation, play with it, see does it give another interval or a point estimate. If it's an interval, that is what you're going from approximation and going towards a specific point estimate. That's what kind of it tells you. And the last one, this is very interesting. Sometimes what you find, the darshana is not very clear, it's not very obvious, because it assumes certain things in the discussion. Other times you will find the modern science is not very clear. Or just last one, I'll give you the example, where the modern science, when you do the science, it assumes certain things, and nothing wrong with it. It assumes that the person who is doing a research is honest, he's not faking the outcome, he's not faking the results. There is an integrity, there is a logic that person is using in a proper way. But this is so many assumptions that you leave it to the person to figure it out, and many times we make mistakes. We make mistakes either way. Now, you can play this with the AI, by the way, afterwards. Ask the question to AI about the modern science versus Nyaya Darshana, and just find out for yourself what answer it gives. In the Nyaya Darshana, this is not left to person's imagination or trial and error. What it says, you can do what you want. But once you put forward an argument, which is this Pancha Avayava, we meaning the Nyaya Darshana, is going to screen it, whether it passes the test by different aspects, which modern science will say, well, you have to be honest. You should be very, truthful. But it is taken for granted. Nyaya Darshana says, You may be truthful, but you may still make a mistake, but don't worry. We are here. And it gives a list of things that any Nyaya Darshana student must master and therefore should able to find out into somebody's argument. And those are typically known as Vitanda, you would have heard that, Hetva Bhasa, Chala, Jati, Nigrahasthana. Which is to say, somebody has made a very good hypothesis. The person thinks it's a good hypothesis. In reality, you find that is not the case. It's not generic, it's not universal, it's not global. So you can go with that. That was my 6th point. So with that, I'm done. Thank you so much.